My parents said they'd hike my rent unless I became my sister's unpaid nanny. The day my parents threatened to raise my rent unless I became my sister's free, live-in nanny, something inside me broke. They thought they had me trapped, but what they didn't realize was I was about to vanish overnight, leaving them to face the consequences of their endless enabling. So picture this. I'm 25, just grinding away at my first elementary school teaching job. I absolutely adore working with kids, but let's be real, the pay isn't exactly rolling in. Money was tight, so I was still living at home, in the same suburban house I grew up in. It wasn't my dream, but it was practical. My parents charged me what my dad called reasonable rent. I bought my own groceries, and I pulled my weight with chores, mowing, fixing, even cleaning out the garage when Dad hurt his back. The plan was simple: save up for a couple of years, then get my own place. Easy, right? Wrong. Everything changed when my older sister, Martha, waltzed back into our lives. Martha, who's 32, has always been, well, let's just say a handful. Growing up, she was the golden child. I don't know if it was because she was the firstborn or if my parents just saw her through rose-tinted glasses, but she could do no wrong. Dropping out of college? Twice. The first time, she wasn't inspired. The second, the professors were too demanding. Jobs? She never held one for more than a few months, always quitting with some excuse about how it wasn't her fault. And my parents, they always bailed her out. Rent due? They'd pay. Car broke down. They'd cover it. Speeding ticket? Mom would write the check, muttering about police targeting young women. Meanwhile, I was working minimum wage scrubbing diner toilets just to save for college, taking out loans to cover tuition. For years, I thought Martha was living her own life, but it turns out she was just bouncing between apartments, constantly behind on rent, and, of course, leaning on Mom and Dad. I was completely in the dark until one day she just showed up and, completely casually, announced she was pregnant. Look, I'm not here to judge, but Martha was in no way, shape, or form in a stable situation. The baby's father was some guy she'd dated for a few months, and from what I gathered, he wasn't exactly thrilled about the surprise. He vanished as soon as she told him. You'd think this would be her rock-bottom moment, right? The wake-up call to finally get her life together. Nope. Instead, she ran straight to Mom and Dad, who, predictable as ever, went into full fix-it mode. Within a week, they were renovating the basement, turning it into a little apartment for her, complete with a kitchenette. I never asked where the money came from, but I overheard Mom whispering about dipping into their retirement savings. I tried to stay out of it. It wasn't my business, after all. If they wanted to throw their money at Martha, that was their choice. But deep down, I could already see the storm brewing. My parents have this infuriating habit of dragging everyone else into Martha's drama, like we all have to band together to solve her latest self-inflicted crisis. At first, I told myself, this won't affect me. Martha would have her own space in the basement. I'd just keep living my life. It was frustrating to watch them jump through hoops for her again, but I tried to ignore it. For about 2 months, I kept that mindset, but then the subtle jabs started. Mom would drop hints about how I should spend more time with Martha, who was going through so much. Never mind that I was working full-time and came home utterly exhausted. Then came the guilt trips. Martha doesn't have anyone else to lean on right now, Mom would sigh, staring directly at me, as if I was her personal crisis manager. Dad was just as bad, weaving Martha into every conversation. You should be grateful for everything you have, Abby, he'd say, passing the salt. Not everyone's as lucky as you. Lucky? I was barely surviving, trying to build a career and save money, while Martha was getting a fully renovated apartment and endless handouts. But things escalated fast one night. I was in the kitchen making tea when I overheard Mom and Dad talking in the living room. She's going to need a lot of help once the baby comes, Mom said. Of course, Dad replied. We'll all pitch in. All? Mom asked. Well, you, me, and Abby, Dad stated, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. I nearly dropped my mug. They hadn't even talked to me about this, yet they'd already decided my fate. A cold dread settled in my stomach. I knew they were cooking up a plan to drag me into Martha's mess, whether I liked it or not. That uneasy feeling only intensified as Martha started showing up more often. She'd sprawl on the couch, endlessly complaining about being pregnant and how unfair it was that her ex had bailed. She'd make little digs about how lucky I was to have a steady job and no kids to worry about. I bit my tongue, refusing to start an argument, but inside a furious voice screamed, Why does this always fall on me? By dinner that night, I had a terrible gut feeling. Something big was coming. The atmosphere was thick with forced casualness. You know, when everyone's in on a secret except you. Mom and Dad chatted about the neighbor's new fence. Martha scrolled on her phone, utterly detached. It was all a prelude. Spaghetti, Dad's go-to for family talks, was on the table. Like spaghetti makes bad news easier to swallow. I tried to just focus on my plate, but then halfway through, Mom cleared her throat. So, we've been thinking. She began, glancing at Dad. I froze. Nothing good ever followed those words. With Martha moving back home, she's going to need some help, Mom continued, her voice sickly sweet. Help with what exactly? I asked, trying to keep my tone neutral. Dad jumped in. With the baby, of course. Martha's got a lot on her plate right now. It'll be hard for her to manage alone. I glanced at Martha. She was still glued to her phone, completely oblivious. Okay, but what does that have to do with me? I asked, setting my fork down. My parents exchanged a look, trying to figure out their next move. Well, Mom said, you're already living here, and you're so good with kids, being a teacher and all. We thought it made sense for you to help with babysitting. Help, I repeated, my eyebrows shooting up. Dad nodded enthusiastically. Yeah, just keep an eye on the baby while Martha gets back on her feet. It wouldn't be full-time or anything, just when you're home. I was stunned. They weren't asking for help. They were expecting me to take on a full-blown second job for free. Wait, let me get this straight, I said, leaning back. You want me to come home from teaching all day and then take care of Martha's baby? Mom sighed, as if I was deliberately difficult. It's not like that, Abby. We're all going to pitch in. All? I asked. Yes, Dad insisted. We're family, and family helps each other. At this point, Martha finally looked up from her phone, a smirk playing on her lips. Wow, Abby, she drawled. I didn't realize helping your sister was such a big deal for you. My hands clenched into fists under the table. The sheer entitlement in her voice was enraging. It's not about that, I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. I have my own life, my own job. I can't just drop everything to babysit. You're being selfish, Mom snapped, her tone sharp. Martha's going through a really hard time. The least you can do is help her out. Why is it my responsibility to fix her choices? I shot back, my voice rising despite myself. She's 32 years old. She's not a kid anymore. Martha gave me an incredulous look. That's enough. Dad thundered, his tone firm. We're all in this together, whether you like it or not. You're living under our roof, and we expect you to contribute. I pay rent, I retorted. I buy my own groceries. I help with chores. How is that not enough? The room fell silent, the tension suffocating. Martha just sat there, smug, as if she'd already won. Well, Mom finally said, if you're not willing to help, maybe we need to rethink your living arrangement. My heart plummeted. Are you threatening to kick me out? Of course not. Mom quickly backtracked. But if you're not willing to contribute more, maybe we need to discuss raising your rent. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. They were blackmailing me, using my housing as leverage to force me into responsibilities that weren't mine. You're seriously going to do this? I asked, my voice trembling. You're going to punish me for not wanting to be Martha's free nanny? It's not punishment, Dad insisted. It's about being part of the family. No, I said, pushing back my chair. It's about you two enabling Martha like you always have, and now you're trying to drag me into it. Don't talk about your sister like that. Mom snapped. I'm done, I said, turning and heading for the stairs. You want to help Martha? Fine, but leave me out of it. I stormed into my room, slamming the door, my heart hammering. I always knew they favored Martha, but this was a whole new level of manipulation. It wasn't about family, it was about control. They wanted to keep me under their roof to exploit my labor. What really haunted me was Martha's smug face, scrolling on her phone, utterly unconcerned. In her mind, it wasn't her problem. Mom and Dad were already bending over backward, and now they were trying to drag me in too. I barely slept that night, replaying the conversation, wishing I'd said 1,000 other things. By morning, the anger was still there, but beneath it, a crushing feeling of being trapped. I desperately wanted to leave, but I was only a few months into my teaching job. Rent in the area was insane, and I couldn't afford a place alone on my salary. It felt impossible. The next few days were a blur of cold shoulders and passive-aggressive jabs. Must be nice to have so much free time after work, Mom would comment as I walked in, exhausted. Yeah, some people don't have that luxury, Dad would chime in, without even looking up from his newspaper. I just ignored them, retreating to my room. What was the point of arguing? It would only escalate, and I had no energy left. Martha, meanwhile, was living her best life. She wasn't even officially moved in yet, but she was practically camped out, taking over the living room with her bags and shoes, acting like she already owned the place. One evening, I walked in to find her sprawled on the couch, watching some mindless reality show, shoveling ice cream into her mouth. She barely grunted a hey, not even bothering to look up. I waited for an apology or a thank you for not exploding, but nothing came. I headed to the kitchen, opened the fridge, and my blood ran cold. Half my groceries were gone. My bread, my yogurt, even my leftovers from the night before, vanished. "Did you eat my food?" I demanded, walking back into the living room. Martha didn't even glance up. "Mom said I could," she mumbled, still chewing. "She's not the one who paid for it." I snapped. Martha finally turned, rolling her eyes. "Chill out, Abby. It's just food." "It's my food," I yelled, my voice shaking with frustration. "If you want groceries, buy your own." "Geez, you don't have to be such a drama queen," she scoffed, setting her bowl down. "You're acting like I stole your car or something." I was speechless. I just stood there, fuming, as she picked up her phone and started texting, completely dismissing me. What was the point? Martha had been getting away with this behavior her entire life because Mom and Dad let her. And now they expected me to enable her too. The next morning, Mom cornered me in the kitchen. "You need to apologize to your sister," she said, her tone sharp. "For what?" I asked, genuinely bewildered. "For making her feel unwelcome. She's going through so much, and the last thing she needs is you being difficult." "Are you serious?" I retorted. "She ate all my food and acted like it was no big deal. How is that my fault?" Mom sighed dramatically. "It's just food, Abby. You can always buy more." "That's not the point," I insisted, trying to keep my voice steady. "The point is she doesn't respect anyone's boundaries, and you're letting her get away with it." "Boundaries?" Mom scoffed. "This is her home now, too. You need to learn how to share." At that moment, I knew. There was no reasoning with her. Mom wasn't interested in my side. She just wanted me to fall in line. Over the next week, the pressure intensified. Mom and Dad started dropping thinly veiled threats about raising my rent if I didn't step up. Martha continued moving her belongings in, gradually taking over more of the house, even using my bathroom because, apparently, the downstairs one wasn't good enough for the golden child. I tried to keep my distance, but it felt like they were all conspiring to drag me deeper into their chaos. Then came the final blow. One night, I found Dad in the living room, a budget spreadsheet clutched in his hand. "We need to talk," he said, motioning for me to sit. I braced myself, taking a seat on the edge of the couch. "We've been looking at the numbers," he began, tapping the paper. "And with Martha moving in, expenses are going up. We think it's only fair for you to contribute more. You're already charging me rent." I shot back. "How much more do you want?" Dad shrugged. "We're still figuring that out, but if you're not willing to help with the baby, this seems like the best solution." I stood up, my chair scraping loudly. "This is ridiculous," I exclaimed. "I'm already paying more than enough for what I get here. If you want me to leave, just say so." "No one's asking you to leave," Dad quickly said. "We're just asking you to do your part." "My part?" I repeated, a bitter laugh escaping me. "You mean Martha's part?" Before he could respond, I walked out, straight to my room, slamming the door. That was it. I couldn't keep doing this. I couldn't live in a house where my boundaries were non-existent, and my parents saw me as nothing more than free labor. I knew with absolute certainty that I had to get out. That thought gnawed at me, growing louder every time Martha paraded through the house like she owned it, or Mom and Dad tried to manipulate me. But knowing I had to leave and actually doing it were two entirely different beasts. I didn't have much saved yet, nowhere near enough for my own place, and the idea of uprooting my entire life felt overwhelming. Yet, I also knew staying meant sinking. If I let them turn me into Martha's unpaid backup parent now, it would never end. I'd wake up 5 years from now, still stuck, miserable and resentful. The very next morning, coffee in hand, I sat down with my laptop and pulled up my budget spreadsheet. Rent, groceries, gas, student loans. I wasn't a stellar saver, but I had been putting a little aside each month. I crunched the numbers and realized I could make a move work if I found something affordable and cut back on every single extra. The universe, it seemed, was actually on my side for once. My coworker, Alicia, had mentioned a few weeks ago that she was looking for a roommate. I hadn't given it much thought then, but now it felt like a lifeline thrown just for me. I texted her. "Hey, is that roommate thing still an option?" She replied almost instantly. "Yep, still looking." "Why, interested?" "Yeah, maybe. Can we talk after work?" Alicia's response was short and sweet. "Of course." That afternoon, I stayed late at school, waiting until the halls were empty before heading to her classroom. "What's up?" she asked, looking up from her stack of essays. I hesitated, unsure how much to reveal, but finally just blurted it out. "I'm thinking about moving out of my parents' place. They're making things complicated." Alicia just nodded, as if she understood everything without me having to explain a thing. "The offer's still open," she said. "It's not huge, but it's clean and we'd split everything down the middle. Rent's $800 a month, utilities included." It was a little more than I'd hoped, but it was doable. "When would you need someone to move in?" I asked. "Yesterday," she joked, then added. "But seriously, anytime. If you're in, the room's yours." I told her I'd let her know by the end of the week, but in my heart, the decision was already made. This was my escape. Now, I just had to figure out how to leave without sparking an all-out family war. If my parents caught wind of my plan too soon, I knew they'd try to sabotage it. Guilt trips, arguments, maybe even instantly raising my rent to stop me from saving. So I kept quiet. I started packing little by little, focusing on essentials, clothes, personal items, anything I couldn't afford to replace. I'd store everything in the trunk of my car, hidden under a blanket. At the same time, I started documenting everything. I took pictures of my room, my furniture, my electronics, anything that could become a point of contention later. I knew Martha had a knack for forgetting what belonged to whom, and I wasn't about to lose my stuff in the chaos. One night, while everyone was asleep, I printed out a formal 30-day notice. I'd done my research. Even though I wasn't a legal tenant, it was smart to have everything in writing. The last thing I needed was them accusing me of bailing without warning. I barely slept, checking the clock, listening for any sound. Finally, at 6 a.m., I slid the envelope under my parents' bedroom door. The reaction was immediate. When I got home from work, Mom and Dad were waiting, letter in hand. "What's this?" Dad demanded, as if I'd committed a crime. "It's my notice," I said, keeping my voice steady. "You're really doing this?" Mom asked, her voice already cracking. "Yes," I stated firmly. "I found a place, and I'm moving out by the end of the month." "You can't just leave." Mom cried. "What about Martha? What about the baby?" I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "Martha and the baby are not my responsibility. I've done everything I can to help around here, but I can't keep living like this." "What is wrong with you?" Dad's voice rose. "You weren't stubborn like this before. We've given you so much, letting you live here, helping you get on your feet. And this is how you repay us." My fists clenched. I paid rent, bought my own food, supported myself since graduation. "I'm not a kid anymore," I bit out through gritted teeth. "And I am not your backup plan for Martha." Mom started to cry, as she always did when things didn't go her way. "How can you do this to us? To your sister?" I said nothing. There was no point. They weren't listening, and I wasn't changing my mind. The days leading up to my move were the most awkward of my life. Mom and Dad barely spoke to me, except for the occasional guilt trip. Martha acted like nothing had changed, continuing to colonize the house with her stuff. One night, I came home to find she'd moved even more of her belongings into the basement, stacking boxes on my couch, cramming clothes into my closet. It was like she was physically marking her territory. "Hope you don't mind," she said when I walked in, completely unbothered. I didn't respond. I just went upstairs, closing my door, a simmering rage building inside me. In the final days, I doubled down on my preparations. The last of my essentials were packed, my budget was triple-checked, and plans with Alicia were finalized. Everything was falling into place, but I still had a knot of unease in my stomach. The hardest part, I knew, would be moving out. I'd arranged for Alicia to swing by with her car early, hoping Martha would still be asleep and Mom and Dad would be distracted. Of course, nothing is ever that smooth with my family. I was halfway through hauling boxes to my car when I heard Dad's slippers shuffling down the hall. He appeared at the top of the stairs, fury etched on his face. "What are you doing?" he demanded. I didn't stop. "I told you I'm leaving today," I said, grabbing another box. "You can't just sneak out," he snapped, following me outside. We're a family, Abby. Are you abandoning your own family? I set the box down in the trunk and turned to face him. I'm not abandoning anyone. I'm choosing to live my own life. There's a difference. Dad looked like he wanted to argue, but then Mom appeared in the doorway, her arms crossed, tears already streaming. You're really doing this? She wailed. Yes, I said, holding my ground. What about Martha? She sobbed. What about the baby? I sighed, the weight of their expectations pressing down on me. Mom, I've told you. Martha and the baby are not my problem. I can't keep sacrificing my own life to fix her mistakes. That set her off. How dare you talk about your sister like that? She shrieked. She's doing the best she can. Is she? I shot back. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like she's just waiting for everyone else to do the work for her. Just then, Martha emerged from the basement, disheveled but wide awake. She took one look at the scene in the driveway, and a sickening smirk spread across her face. Don't worry, Mom, she purred, dripping with sarcasm. If Abby wants to be selfish, let her. We don't need her anyway. My fists clenched. I wanted to scream, but I refused to give her the satisfaction. Instead, I turned to Alicia, who had just pulled up in her car. Let's get this done, I said, completely ignoring the chaos behind me. Alicia gave me a sympathetic look and started helping me load the rest of my stuff. My parents continued to shout and wail, throwing every guilt trip imaginable. Who's going to help us now? Dad roared. How can you be so heartless? Mom cried. Martha just leaned against the doorframe, watching it all unfold like a personal drama for her entertainment. By the time we were done, I felt utterly drained, like I'd run a marathon. I stood in the driveway, taking one last look at the house that had been home for so many years. It should have been bittersweet, but all I felt was an overwhelming surge of relief. With that, I started my engine and drove away, Alicia following close behind. The relief that washed over me when I pulled into Alicia's apartment complex was immediate. It wasn't fancy, but it was clean, quiet, and most importantly, drama-free. Alicia helped me carry everything inside, and within an hour, I was unpacked. We sat on the couch just chatting about work, and it felt normal, like a glimpse of the peaceful life I'd been missing. But that peace lasted about 2 hours. My phone started buzzing nonstop, calls, texts, voicemails. It was my parents, my aunts, my cousins. Apparently, Mom had already spread the news that I'd abandoned the family. Abby, how could you do this to your sister? Aunt Carol's voicemail began. She's pregnant and vulnerable. Don't you care about family? Another text read. Selfish doesn't even begin to describe you. But the worst were Martha's social media posts. She'd gone full victim mode, posting pictures of her baby bump with captions like, "Some people would rather run away than help their own family. At least my baby will know what real love looks like." I blocked her immediately. It was infuriating, but I refused to let it pull me back in. I reminded myself this was exactly why I'd left, to escape the endless manipulation and drama. Then things got even weirder at work the next week. My mom showed up at the school during my lunch break, crying and begging to talk to me. She was in full meltdown mode, rambling about how I'd destroyed the family and how Martha was falling apart. My principal had to step in and ask her to leave, which was absolutely mortifying. I spent the rest of the day avoiding eye contact, knowing everyone was probably wondering about my insane family. But ironically, that public incident actually worked in my favor. I thought I was done with that house and all its chaos, but of course, life isn't that simple. About 2 weeks later, I realized I'd left some crucial documents behind. My teaching certification, tax forms, other papers I desperately needed. In my rush to escape, I hadn't double-checked the small drawer where I kept them. Because of the school incident, I'd actually confided in a couple of coworkers about everything, and they didn't hesitate to offer help. "Let us know when you're ready to grab the rest of your stuff," Alicia said, handing me her spare car keys. "We'll make it quick." A few days later, Alicia and another coworker, Maria, came with me to my parents' house. I thought I was mentally prepared for whatever nonsense they'd try, but I severely underestimated how low they'd go. When we got to my room, it was unrecognizable. Martha had moved in even more of her things, mixing them with mine in a blatant territorial takeover. Clothes that weren't mine were crammed into my dresser. Random baby items were piled on my desk. My nightstand had been completely emptied and filled with her things. "What's going on here?" I muttered, more to myself than anyone. Martha appeared in the doorway, sipping coffee, looking completely unbothered. "Oh, hey," she said casually, as if nothing was wrong. "I guess some of my stuff got mixed in. It's hard to tell what's yours and what's mine at this point." I stared at her, utterly floored by her audacity. "You mean the stuff that was in my room, where I've lived for years?" She shrugged. "Well, you already left, so what does it matter?" It was clear she'd done this on purpose, hoping to make things impossible for me. But what she didn't know was that I had anticipated this exact scenario. I pulled out my phone and opened the folder with the pictures of my room, taken before her invasion. "I already have photos of everything," I said, holding up the screen so she could see. "And I made a list of all my stuff, right down to the serial numbers on my electronics." Martha's face twisted in frustration. Before she could retort, Mom and Dad stormed in. "What's going on?" Dad demanded, his eyes blazing. "What are you doing in here?" "I came to grab some stuff I forgot," I explained, keeping my voice as calm as possible. "But Martha is claiming she can't tell what's hers and what's mine. Luckily, I have documentation for everything I own." Dad's expression darkened. "If you take anything that doesn't belong to you, I'll call the police." I let out a short, humorless laugh. "Go ahead," I said. "We can also talk to them about the legality of you entering my room without notice and tampering with my belongings." That shut him up. Alicia and Maria stepped in, helping me sort through the mess. Martha tried to argue when I picked up my laptop, claiming it was hers, but all I had to do was pull up the purchase receipt and a photo of the serial number. The more she realized her pathetic plan wasn't going to work, the angrier she got. "This is so unfair," she shouted, throwing her hands in the air. "You're stealing from a pregnant woman." I finally turned to her, completely fed up. "The only person trying to steal anything here is you," I said, my voice firm. "Just like you've been trying to steal my time and my freedom by expecting me to be your unpaid nanny. Not anymore." And with that, I got into Alicia's car and didn't look back. That was 6 months ago. Martha had the baby, and just as I predicted, everything is unraveling. My parents are now stuck providing the full-time childcare they desperately tried to dump on me, all while working their own jobs. They're exhausted, overwhelmed. According to the few family members who still speak to me, Martha hasn't even tried to find a job. She claims she's too stressed to work, which is probably true, considering she spends most of her time scrolling on her phone, ignoring her responsibilities. She's still living in my parents' house, now with a crying infant, and that unfinished basement renovation is steadily draining their retirement savings. I've heard they've made several attempts to contact me. First, angry texts about how ungrateful I was. When that didn't work, they switched to guilt trips about how much the baby needed me. Their latest strategy? Sending photos of my niece with captions like, "Don't you want to meet your only niece?" And "She needs her aunt in her life." I've blocked them all on social media and set up email filters. The few family members who understand my position have kept me in the loop, but I've made it clear. I'm not interested in rebuilding any relationships until my parents and Martha acknowledge their behavior and make real changes. Ironically, if they had just respected my boundaries and simply asked for occasional babysitting help like normal people, I probably would have agreed. I love kids, and I wouldn't have minded helping out sometimes. But their blatant attempt to trap me into full-time, unpaid childcare, while completely disregarding my space and autonomy, destroyed any chance of that happening. And yeah, that's my story. What I realized from all this messy experience is that sometimes the healthiest thing you can do for your family, and for yourself, is to stop enabling their destructive behaviors, even if it means walking away. So, I'm curious, what would you have done in my place? Have you ever had to draw a hard line with family to protect yourself? Let me know in the comments below. I really want to hear your thoughts.